While we don't have legal counsel joining us for some reason, I think we're unsafe. Oh, Paige, you moved seats. Oh, wow. Wow, all right. Welcome to the front row. Welcome to the front row. All right, well, welcome everyone to the Finance Committee, the final meeting of Committee Day. There's been a lot of grousing today about the length of this meeting. Actually, I think we're quite timely today, so no complaining. Everyone settle in, and I'll call the meeting to order. David, do we have any public speakers?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. We have two members of the public speaking today. As a reminder, we ask that all public speakers adhere to the MTA's rules of conduct and decorum. I'd also like to remind our public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware that there will be a warning beep to remind you that you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. Our first speaker will be Rachel Foss, followed by Jason Anthony.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Foss. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable authorities like the MTA. News reports indicate a deal on MTA funding and the state budget is emerging. While it appears that all parties intend to fill the MTA's deficit, it's unclear whether funding will be provided for service expansions or to avoid fare hikes as requested by many of our fellow advocates. Also unknown is what policy changes will be included. In particular, we support greater capital spending transparency through the Capital Program Dashboard, which was included by the Senate and is also a bill sponsored by Senator Ramos and Bobby Carroll in the Assembly. We have the following thoughts in response to a potential proposal floated in news reports from Friday. On increasing the payroll mobility tax for only New York City employers, we supported the governor's original proposal for an increase for the entire MTA region because it would put the MTA on the most stable, solid ground and be remitted directly to the MTA. We opposed the Senate's attempt to exempt certain employers in Hudson Valley counties from the existing PMT, and attempts to exempt all employers outside of New York City from a new increase are similarly problematic. Employers outside of New York City in the MTA region are part of the same regional economy that depends on a healthy MTA and have a shared responsibility with all MTA stakeholders to make the MTA whole. New York City taxpayers already pay an outsized amount of taxes to the MTA, according to the Citizen Budget Commission research. On one-shot payments from the state, we believe these would probably come from the general fund and would require yearly appropriation. This means that it's more vulnerable to raids or cuts during the budget process, and one-shot funds should only be a bridge to new recurring MTA dedicated taxes. Lastly, on the free bus pilot, we believe they are best accompanied by inclusion of automated traffic enforcement mechanisms to improve bus speeds. Additionally, sufficient state funding must be provided to offset all costs to the MTA. And to that end, there should be a public report from the MTA regarding implementation that shows the costs, ridership, etc. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our second and final speaker is Jason Anthony.
Hey Neil, hey Kevin, and the rest of the Finance Committee meeting. Last Wednesday, we found out on the New Jersey Transit Corporation's board meeting that in 2025 they will face a fiscal cliff. And at the same time, they unveiled that they're even considering congestion pricing, Kevin. That's interesting news to hear. But their own governor, Phil Murphy, has said publicly opposing congestion pricing. But one of their board members, Bob Gordon, said publicly in their board meeting that even him is supporting congestion pricing. But what are we talking about? On one hand, they're having a fiscal cliff that they have easily avoided 5 years back, having fare increase that they didn't 5 years ago. While us, we're having a fiscal cliff, and we are asking them to contribute as a region that we are to support us to our congestion pricing idea, but they're acting very selfishly, and then we are facing a fiscal cliff ourselves, and regions like our beloved Neil, that pays $600 a month to travel to New York City. It is not fair. It is not a great idea that states like New Jersey are acting very selfish and to serve their own interests. It is time for them to pay their fair share to our region. That's all I have to say. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I was just informed that there are two remote speakers. The first remote speaker is Christopher Greif, who will be followed by Andy Pollock.
And good afternoon. I thought I almost forgot me already. Christopher D. Grimes, sorry, cannot be there, but I do want to discuss about this concern of the fair. As you know, as Jano has been mentioning, the fair, we need to make sure that low-income families, including seniors and people with disabilities, we cannot lose that funding to make sure that every low-income seniors and people with disabilities are getting the payment to get on the bus and get on the subway, and especially accessoride. Right now, if we go somewhere else, the fare is a little more higher. Here, it's lucky we can get it on accessoride, which is the cheapest one, $275. But if the fare goes up, a lot of low-income families, seniors, and disabled cannot afford this. This is not fair to them. And if we are doing any fare hike or public hearings, we ask you to please put in the book how much is the reduced fare price. We also want to make sure that the monthly stays where it is, because people who use the monthly on the subways can balance their budget for Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, because it does help them to budget their budget so they can travel on any of the bus or the subway or the express bus or the SPS buses. We ask you to please do so. So therefore, families, low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities can get on a bus and the subway safely. And the ones who do pay the fare. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Andy Pollock, also remote.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, Neil, and good afternoon, everyone. So I am speaking today, as usual, per behalf of Passengers United. So over the weekend, I notified Jack Nierenberg and Jonathan D'Souza about the news from Albany, first reported by Newsday, that it sounds like Albany is going to be sending some money over to the MTA as part of the upcoming fiscal year 2024 budget. Any day now, hopefully we're going to be getting some excellent news from the state capitol in Albany. Now, I've been hearing rumblings, especially Jack and Charlton on their behalf, that there is a pilot program that's being in the works to have 2 free buses in each borough. Now, specifically in Queens, I did speak with Charlton about this, and we do agree that the Q52-53 route does need to be free because it goes from Far Rockaway and it does serve all the way up to Woodside. And then hopefully maybe a couple east-west routes can be reevaluated, like the Q1213, the 46, the 43 in Queens. Those are busy routes to see a high amount of ridership out of all the Queens buses. And hopefully Manhattan buses can, basically I'm hoping that everybody will be able to benefit from 2 routes being free in each borough once Albany provides us the money. So that's pretty much it, Neil. Thank you for letting me speak today, and hopefully I'll be back speaking to the committees next month.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the public speaking session.
All right, thank you to all our speakers. Approval of the minutes, March 27th meeting. Can I have a motion to approve? Second.
Second.
Discussions, edits, deletions. Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion passes. Thank you very much. 2023 Committee Work Plan. It's in the committee book, page 13. There is one small change around the annual report on the variable rate debt. I know that may throw you all off that we're going to be moving that to next month. Hopefully everyone accedes to that change. I know, that's amazing. We're waiting on that. All right. Not going to sleep, Hayda said. All right. David, budget watch, please, sir.
Certainly, as fast as possible.
I didn't say that. I didn't say fast as possible. I just said budget watch. Don't worry.
Results are for operations through March and subsidies through April and are measured against the adopted budget. Farebox revenue was $25 million favorable, or 7% in March, and over the first 3 months of the year was favorable by $36 million, or 3.5%, mostly reflecting favorable ridership, but also some higher than projected average fare. Ridership has been trending consistently with the midpoint of the McKinsey scenarios in the mid-60% range since September, although March was more favorable. Farebox revenue through March, however, remains $393 million, or 27% less than the first 3 months of 2019. Toll revenue was $16 million favorable, or 8.7% in March, and was $36 million, or 7% favorable year-to-date, reflecting higher than projected traffic. Operating expenses were $21 million, or 1.6% favorable in March. Year-to-date expenses were $100 million favorable, or 2.6%. Year-to-date, 62%, or $61 million, is attributable to favorable payroll and health and welfare costs due to vacancies, including additional overtime to cover for those vacancies, with the remainder predominantly timing-related. Overtime, which is included in those expense numbers, was $28 million unfavorable in March, or 41%, and was $46 million unfavorable year-to-date, or 21%. Overruns were primarily due to vacancy and absentee coverage. Debt service was $27 million favorable, or 10% in March, and $42 million favorable, or 5% year-to-date, due to the timing of debt issuances, debt service deposits, as well as lower than budgeted variable rates. Subsidies were $93 million unfavorable year-to-date through April, or 7%, primarily reflecting results for the real estate transaction taxes, which were unfavorable by $104 million, or 28%. The petroleum business tax, which was favorable by $8 million, or 4%. The payroll mobility tax, which was favorable by $16 million, or 3%. And the for-hire vehicle surcharge, which was unfavorable by $12 million, or 10%. So the real estate taxes and the for-hire vehicle were unfavorable. The PMT and the petroleum business tax were favorable. Taken together, operating results through March and operating budget subsidies through April, these results were favorable by $120 million against the budget, or 7%. And if there are any questions.
Questions? Hearing none. Please, sir.
Yeah, just a couple comments. Yeah, I think the takeaway is on the budget, we're kind of on track, within the margin of error, 100 million. I'd say the, ridership we watched, which did very well in March, is kind of flattened out a little bit in April. So we're kind of right on target. If you look at some of the graphs, it looks like we've actually started to trend above the McKinsey midpoint. That was a good March number. We're kind of back to the McKinsey midpoint, but with the school holidays, we'll see how it plays out. On the the economically sensitive taxes, the one thing you heard David say, the real estate transaction taxes took a pretty big hit. So it's definitely something to watch. We collect over $1 billion a year in real estate taxes, and they're off 100-ish million just in a couple months. So, but that said, the other taxes are hanging in there. So we'll just have to see it. In terms of expenses, same thing, running a little bit under, mainly vacancies, overtime up a little bit, as David mentioned. Looking forward, we're obviously all waiting for the state budget. I'd say that obviously a little bit later than we're all hoping. So other than the anxiety of coming in every day and hoping to hear a deal's done, we're still on track. Obviously, we're running out of time. We would have loved to know our path by this point and be able to talk about what we're doing on the fare and toll plan. So there might, depending on when the budget does pass, we might be, we'll see how the exact timing on the fare side works out. As you've read in the papers, it seems like a deal's getting closer, but it's never done until it's done. I'd say the good thing in the discussions is there's always, every party at the table has recognized and offered a good amount of funding for MTA to, meet our goals. It's been the components that have been more of the back and forth. So stay tuned. Hopefully something soon. As you know, extender I think was put in place till Friday, but hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe this will be the last extender for this cycle, but I don't know.
All right, well, thank you, Kevin. I mean, seriously, I think this is wonderful news of what we've been hearing, whether our public speakers or Kevin's commentary, the governor's leadership, your consistency, and Jano's about demanding clarity about what we need, the governor's leadership on what she believes we need, and the legislature obviously coming together to provide for what is a real chasm. I do have a question for you, David, if you don't mind. Going to Budget Watch, thank you for putting these graphs in. I don't know if people are looking at these, but they are helpful, if in small font pictures, for what the issue is. If you wouldn't mind a couple of clarifying questions. I find the upper right-hand box to be the most useful, which is the MTA-wide ridership box, because obviously that is the primary reason for our budget chasm. Not that this committee can support the increased return to riders, but we certainly are affected by it. So could you remind me a couple things? When we write MTA-wide ridership, what is included in that number?
It's all of our operating agencies, obviously with the exception of B&T. So it's transit, bus, and subway, MTA bus, Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and Staten Island Railway.
So it's excluding bridges and tunnels?
Correct.
Okay, good. And then the second thing is, again, my eyes are very weak at 52 years old, I guess. Could you help me just maybe going forward put underneath the month what the actual number is? I mean, clearly you can see it's touching 70%, what looks to be.
Yeah, it's actually 69.3, I believe.
Okay.
This month.
What month is that for?
March.
March. Okay. So you're talking the real data now, but we're looking back 1 month. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay,
so
fine.
March was a good, if you look at the graph, it looks like it's touching
Right,
up towards
right.
the top end is probably when we had April, and it might come back closer to
So we're in the time machine here a little bit. We're back a month, but you're in the present day, it seems like. Okay.
But just to remind everybody, this total ridership, or at least on a revenue basis, is, the budget projects 69% on average for the calendar year 23. So we're getting up to kind of where we need to be. We can't really peter out at 65 or 66%. We gotta, by end of the year, hopefully start to get 70, 71% to get the average over the year
And just to remind my colleagues, if we follow the solid green line in that box, the midpoint, the MTA-wide ridership, that tracks effectively with our budgeted numbers. So if the ridership numbers track along, knowing that, for example, real estate is a totally uncorrelated to ridership item, if we track along with the ridership number, the solid line, the midpoint, we're tracking along with our budget roughly.
Roughly. It also depends on the average ticket price, which drives revenue, which has been a bit on the favorable side and so forth, but yes.
Okay, so just for all of us here playing here and those playing at home, following along with how we're progressing, I think that's a useful graph for us all to pay attention to. All right, Marcia on the video screen, Finance Watch.
And we'll try to
sorry.
make it bigger for you.
Yeah, I think the sizes, I mean, we do have the technology, it's digital, we can afford the bigger, maybe
Either
next
that or I'll
page.
bring special glasses
Or
for
special
you.
glasses, thank you very much, very, very kind. Okay, enough humor. Marcia, Finance Watch, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Hope everyone can hear me. Before I start, I just want to say a welcome to Olga Chernat, who is the Deputy Chief Financial Services, replacing Pat McCoy. And starting next month, she'll take over Finance Watch, and we are pleased to have her back, especially our team. She is my boss. Just a couple quick items. You'll see in the book we mentioned something about the P3 ADA upgrade project. That's really just to give you a status update about the project that is going to provide upgraded elevators at 13 subway stations. The developer is going to be pricing their bonds next week. And once that financing is in place, the project will be able to proceed. They'll be closed by the end of the week, settled on the deal by the end of the week. And included in the pledged assets to the bondholders are the payments that are required by MTA under the project agreement, such as the availability payments and the progress payments. So our team is going to be involved in the pricing to monitor and keep tabs of that. And we will provide a status update for you next month, probably. And just the monthly fuel hedging program, the March 29th, we executed a 1.6 million gallon ultra low sulfur diesel fuel hedge at an all-in price of approximately $2.44 per gallon. Details are in the book. And one last thing, I just want to mention, we have our annual disclosure statement and our combined continuing disclosure filings. That's that annual big push that we need to do by the end of April. We'll be posting that on April 28th. And I just want to give a shout out and thank you to all of the agency staff that have provided valuable information. Jim McGovern, his whole team has been working so hard to get it'll be unaudited, but it'll meet our requirement, the unaudited financials for us to post. Our special disclosure counsel, Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, who's leading the effort, along with our deputy general counsel, Dwight Quah. So just a big thank you to everyone, because it is a big effort every year, and we appreciate that. And that's it for Finance Watch.
Any questions for Finance Watch? Okay, so Marcia, maybe as a final task for you and thank you for your service on this committee since Pat left. Just remind everyone, I mean, the graph on the top of the Finance Watch, I think, is useful and instructive for us to understand what's been happening in the markets. So can you just compare for us what the average fixed rate was sort of a year ago to now? Maybe just, again, it's always valuable to instruct our committee about what you're seeing so we can be more adept at understanding. So can you just give us a little lesson about what this graph is telling us, please?
Yeah, so and I may defer to Olga, who has experience in this as well. The graph that we're using is the bond buyer revenue bond index, and that has, I believe, 20 revenue bonds in it. Olga, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And that average life of 30 years is kind of showing the typical average life of similar to what we would usually issue, which is a 30-year level debt service. That's the assumptions in the financial plan. So as you can see, we started tracking this in August in terms of this chart. So you can see the issuances that we have. And what changes it not only is the market volatility, but it's also the average life of the bonds that we're issuing. So the longer term bonds with an average life that are above 25 years, closer to 30 years, you can see those above the line versus the TBTA 2023A, for example, average life of 7 years. That was a refunding, and you can see that the interest rate was 2.56%. So the last deal we had was the sales tax deal, and if you remember when I mentioned it last month, it was during a time that was already a little volatile, and it was the day before the bank failures were announced. So it was a fairly, it was somewhat volatile that week. So you can see that interest rate did come a little bit higher than what we were benching against. Olga, I don't know, do you want to add any insight that you've seen from your experience in the muni market as well? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries. Can you hear me? I think Marcia gave a great explanation of what's happening on the graph, but very broadly, right? The line, the bond buyer revenue bond index line, right, which is that represents the benchmark yield. And again, as Marcia said, that's an index that's comprised of 20 revenue bonds, so it's a composite index. And we are measuring our performance relative to the benchmark. So you can see, based on different characteristics of our bonds, we, come fairly close to the benchmark, or way below or under the yields. I would also point out that another factor that kind of drives the the various performance of our credit as well as the benchmark is the credit quality of the bonds in the benchmark versus credit quality of the bonds offered by the MTA.
You want to say something?
Yeah, just one thing to add on. So if you think a big picture, we're in kind of an interesting environment. If you look at the graph, what you'll notice is, and this is reflective of long-term rates, not short-term rates, which you probably hear a lot about what the Federal Reserve influences. So long-term rates actually were much higher around the end of 22, early 2023, and they've actually come down quite a bit. If you look at the graph, it's come down. That's because inflation has started to come down, and the market has started to view that the Fed's getting towards the end of their tightening cycle. So usually where you have a yield curve where rates are lower on the short end and higher the longer you borrow, it's actually inverted right now. And so our borrowing cost of our borrowing in the 10, 20, or 30-year part of the curve is actually lower than current variable rate. So I would say that, there was some fear around the beginning of the year that, runaway inflation could lead to runaway interest rates. Now it's much more balanced, and it's really, is inflation going to keep coming down? Obviously, a lot of people say the interest rates reflect a relatively high probability of a recession sometime over the next 12 to 18 months. There's views all over mild recession, no recession, so forth and so on. So I would call it's a fairly, given everything going on, it's a fairly benign interest rate environment from our perspective.
Benign, but worse than it was.
Worse than, than it was back in, early 2022, but kind of less scary than it was in early 2020.
And I bring it up not because I want to bore people with a history lesson about muni bonds or what the last year is like, but it would be useful if we had, as a committee, a rule of thumb in our heads that for every, in this case, if you see 3.15 in the far left of the graph to 3.64 at the far right, how sensitive we are. I know most of our debt is long-term, it's fixed rate, but with a half a point increase over that period of time, a rule of thumb in our total portfolio of bonds and issuance, what in fact it's worth to us if we had to issue things at a higher rate. I'm not putting you on the spot to give an answer, but I think that's worthy of us to think about as a committee, what that actually does cost. Because again, we have no control over rates, but we certainly are affected by rates, and worth thinking about. Okay, back to the agenda at hand. David, we have an action item, please, around FinTech. Over to you, sir.
Certainly. This item seeks board approval to allow the First Mutual Transportation Assurance Company, FIMTech, to indicate a capital markets-based reinsurance program by expanding FIMTech's current traditional capital markets-based reinsurance program to include a catastrophe bond-based reinsurance transaction or similar parametric-based reinsurance contracts. The purpose of this transaction is to reduce FIMTech's risk transfer rates through diversifying the reinsurer base from the traditional global reinsurance market to include capital markets. This will allow FIMTech to create additional savings by employing a strategy of maximizing tension competition inside each market as well as between the two markets. Materials can be found on page 27 of the committee book, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Can I have a motion, please? Thank you, David. Second? Thank you. Any questions, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstention, motion passes. Thank you very much. We are here to spend a little time with procurement. We're going to flip the order of what's in our book. I'd like to first start by thanking Kavesh for his incredible service. He is going to be moving on to retirement, though, as he has reminded me many times, he is way too young for his retirement. We will miss, first and foremost, his mellifluous voice, which I think we will not have any procurement person, past, present, or future, with such a stentorian and radio-ready voice as his. But more importantly, we've been fortunate to have Kavesh's, I think, very thoughtful approach to procurement. I am sure that that while his pension will not be cheap, that he has saved us far more in being a diligent procurement officer. So thank you, Kavesh, for your tenure and your time, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd just like to say it's been a privilege and an honor to serve at the MTA in this great state of New York, not forgetting Connecticut. And, I came in at a tumultuous time where, we had a great challenge. And I think that one of the great ideas of consolidating the entire procurement organization together with the supply chain was an excellent idea, where we were able to focus on critical and key procurements and also leverage the might of the MTA, should I say. And we've seen some definite positive moves in that regard. And, so I leave a great team behind. Thank you to the board for your cooperation and also your good counsel. To the MTA folks, it's been a great ride. And it's a small world. I'm sure somewhere along the line we will meet up, and I wish you everything of the best. Thank you.
All right, well, you're not done. Oh, you're not done yet. Let's start with the HP contract, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So there are two actions for Finance Committee approval this month in the amount of $88.6 million. These actions are found in the April Finance Committee book on pages 32 to 38. The first action is a modification to extend an all-agency competitive procurement contract with HP Hewlett-Packard, Inc. to continue to provide managed print services for MTA and its operating agencies for 3 additional years. To date, there are an estimated 4,054 printers in the managed print services program and installed throughout various MTA locations. And board members, this is actually a good news story, because when we started off this program in 2016, we had 13,000 plus printers. So we've reduced it dramatically, and it has come with significant savings, much to the order of close on to $16 million over that program. So we want to continue with this contract with a single service provider to service all the standardized in-scope imaging and output devices, which will allow for streamlining of the equipment and maintenance process, improve the level of service quality and responses for repairs and maintenance, reduce the number of imaging and output devices, and provide a central point of administration for proactive remote management for all in-scope devices. This 3-year extension is projected to cost $17 million, which covers the existing fleet of leased devices as well as maintains and supports the MTA's own devices not under a lease structure. On another note, we also have a service level agreement with HP, which is at 97%. They have consistently exceeded the 97%. So from that perspective, I submit this procurement for board approval.
Okay, any questions? David? Nope. Okay. Any questions on this procurement? I'm going to take a motion on this one first, please. Can I have a motion to approve the managed services? Sammy, second. Blanca, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion passes. Kavesh, the second procurement, please.
Thank you. So the second one is the award of a competitively negotiated services contract to Michael Baker Engineering to provide oversight services of the MTA's capital program for a 4-year term with 3 one-year options to renew at the MTA's sole discretion in the sum of $71.6 million. The MTA requires the services of an independent transit engineering firm to perform periodic monitoring and oversight on projects in its capital program. Under this contract, Michael Baker will provide the MTA Capital Program Committee professional observations, evaluations, recommendations, and reports concerning key elements of the MTA's capital program. This includes the quality of work, adherence to the project and program budgets, adherence to schedules, project scope and functional requirements, and effective program and project management controls. After negotiations with Michael Baker had submitted its best and final offer, which represented a reduction of $22.6 million from its original proposal. And this represented a 24% reduction on their offer and was based on a heavily negotiated reduction in pricing, reduction of the proposed number of personnel, hourly rate adjustments, profit and fee percentages, and also with MTA audit recommendations and overhead rate reduction as well. So I'd like to turn to Michelle Woods, the MTA's Auditor General, for further discussion. Michelle.
Thank you, Kavesh. The independence of the IEC is critical to their oversight role, and one I personally take very seriously as the MTA Auditor General. Because of that, the current contract and the proposed new contract both include specifications related to confidentiality, conflict of interest, and independence of the contractor and subcontractor. The employees performing the work as the IEC are required to sign non-disclosure agreements and agree to hold all confidential information in strict confidence. The contractor is also prohibited from proposing on or working on any other capital program-related work for the MTA, the prime contractor. Consistent with the current agreement, if a subcontractor to the IEC, the prime IEC, would like to propose on any future MTA capital program project, they must first provide the MTA project manager and the Office of Construction Oversight with a written request which identifies all the individuals and entities involved and sets forth in detail the nature of the relationship and why it would not constitute a conflict of interest. This must be reviewed and approved by the project manager at the OCO, which is an MTA employee, prior to the subcontractor being allowed to proceed. I've committed to monitoring this very closely as we go forward in the new contract, even though it's not different from the old contract. I've also committed to establishing a written procedure, so it's really clear how we will be monitoring that, where we'll get the information from, how we can ensure not just what's in the contract, which requires the subcontractors to disclose and the prime contractor to disclose, but also as a detective control, so that I'll be looking at any payments we make through both our PeopleSoft system as well as our tracking through the PSR system, which is our project tracking system, as well as the B2G system, which tracks all subcontractors that are minority business firms, so that we know how much is being paid, since we don't have a direct contracting relationship to them. Paige, is there anything?
Sure. I just wanted to, I moved up to the big table just to underscore a couple of things about the contract. The contractor can enter into subcontracts, but that is only after the written consent from the MTA. So the MTA will provide written consent as to what that subcontract looks like and the services the subcontractor is going to provide and the terms of the subcontract. Also, to avoid any actual or potential conflict of interest, the contractor shall be prohibited from using any subcontractor for these services, for the IEC services related to anything the subcontractor is doing for a capital project. And that includes also third-party contracts. So if a subcontractor wants to engage in services for any other entity, they need to get, that needs to be disclosed to the MTA, especially if that third-party contract requires the services or agreement with the MTA. So there are a lot of provisions in the contract that centers around any potential or actual conflicts of interest.
Kevin, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just one thing, just Michelle, to be clear, in terms of the subcontractors, they're required to disclose. MTA staff will be sharing that information with capital program committee members, some frequency, so the committee itself can assess kind of the relationships or what firms might be doing something under the one contract versus another.
Sure. And so, our contract with the prime contractor is our relationship, but I've committed to developing a procedure that specifically talks about how we, within the MTA, how our project management will monitor it and will report out. And so, yes, we will report any potential conflict to the CPC and to finance if they choose to have that information. That will explain, yes, we have a subcontractor to our prime who does this work. However, they would like to propose on this other contract, and this is why it's not a conflict of interest. But and we have the ability within the contract to disallow that. So if there is a conflict, we do not have to approve for them to do work where there would be a potential conflict.
Okay, I think we've had a number of discussions about this in other sessions, and so I want to just give an opportunity for us to talk about it before we even move this for a vote. So David first, please.
Yeah, I'm going to vote for this, but I'm worried about some intangibles, that even though there's no direct evidence of conflict, whether the subcontractor, in this case also representing us in another fashion, might withhold real criticism. And this is a soft thing, not on something they're working on. But will that ultimately mean they'll pull their punches on something else because of their other substantial financial engagement?
I think I'm going. Could I just address that? Because so currently, the current contract, the way it's set up, allows the subcontractors to do that work. And, I've only been responsible for them since August, but I can certainly tell you that none of the subcontractors working under the prime contractor have pulled their punches, regardless. So it is a soft thing. It's something that has to be watched. But we do watch that. We do, work with them on, OCO, the people that we, Michael's in the room, we work closely on them with their oversight of each of those projects. So we know what's happening with them.
Okay, please, Elizabeth.
If I'm reading this correctly, it looks like we went out for public advertising. We sent notice to 183 potential bidders. 84 requests came in to pull the RFP, to take a look at it, but we only received 2 bids. This is just a comment. We might want to go back to some of the other folks that pulled the proposal to see why they didn't bid.
Procurement did. Do you want do?
So, board members, so what, in fact, this is one of the challenges we face. Typically where a number of the proposers or intended proposers had pulled it, but then realized, okay, they, to an extent, may not be able to work on other contracts for the MTA. So the verbal responses we got from the team was, listen, we'd rather then look at working for the MTA on the C&D side or whichever other agency where the pool is much larger and we are not limited to just this oversight role. So that's why you end up getting very little competition. But at the same time, these are the firms that went through a rigorous process and have said, we are prepared to do this. Yeah.
Other comments? Hada?
I just to comment on your comment. We've been through this for the last, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks, and I think what the way Michelle and Paige described how we're moving forward on this contract, I think makes me comfortable to vote for it. But I want to make sure that we're going to, be updated and be, I don't want to say be told, but made aware of any issues that arise as a result of this.
So, absolutely. So we'll have a procedure that lays out how we're going to monitor it. But and the only reason I'm comfortable with how you'll be told is because I won't allow anything to go forward that has a true conflict. And so the only thing I would be bringing to you is to explain, here's what's going to happen, and this is why it's not a conflict. And if there was any concern on the on the CPC side or within finance, of course we
But
wouldn't.
you'll also keep us aware of if a Baker wants to bid on something.
Baker won't be able to,
Won't
but
be able
yes,
to
any
bid on
sub.
anything else.
Yes,
Okay.
any sub,
Okay.
but any sub, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sharif, please.
Sure, thank you. So I too am going to vote for this, and I do want to comment on what my colleagues have commented on. Number one, first, to thank Kevin, to thank Paige, to thank Michelle for the extensive conversations, and you, Chair, obviously, extensive conversations about this. I think that we all agree that the IEC performs an incredibly important function. And so we want to preserve that independence. We also had significant conversations about the balance that we need to strike with respect to having a healthy pool of contractors to be able to draw upon so that we have healthy competition and essentially produce a better product for the MTA. And so to Elizabeth's point, you know, it is kind of telling that we started out with this huge sort of universe to get proposals, but we only landed 2. And so I say it's telling because, again, I mean, I think, you know, the bottom line is driving this, right? And this is a very important function for this agency, and therefore we had to balance. But the conversations that we've had over the last several weeks were to create those firewalls, to create those procedures, to make sure that there are absolutely no conflicts. And so the written procedure that Michelle referenced that's going to come back, the reporting to the CPC committee, the reporting to the finance committee, the disclosures that will be required, both contractually and procedurally. We wanted to make sure that all of those were buttoned up and the I's were dotted and T's were crossed so that we ensure that there will be absolutely no conflicts. Again, while we have the balance with allowing subcontractors to bid on other work so that we don't have a completely chilling effect on the subcontracts and the work that we want the contractor community to bid on. So I will be voting for this, and thank you for the opportunity to explain.
Thank you, Sharif. Anyone else? Michelle, when can we expect the procedures you're going to put in place to be written and shared with this committee? When's a good committee meeting to put that on the calendar for?
Well, I won't probably do it at the committee meeting, but I'll provide it before the next committee meeting.
Oh, I mean, I think it actually would be. I mean,
Okay.
unless you think, I think it would actually be quite useful to do it in public session.
Yeah, sure.
I think this whole committee's job is transparency, and certainly what I stand for. So
Next
I would
committee
actually
meeting.
like it to be done here, and I think we should do it in parallel. Or I mean, we should ask the chair of CPC, who is also the chair of the board, to see if he would like to have that done in his agenda, maybe even on the same day or maybe a different day. But will you and Kevin and Mark work out when is the right meeting, next meeting after, and I'd like to put that on the calendar. I don't want to lose the thread given the importance of the conversation. Everyone good? All right, so I'm going to then call, sir. I'm going to then call for a vote, motion to approve the Baker contract for the IEC.
So moved.
Thank you, Hayda, second. All right, Elizabeth, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstention, motion passes. Thank you very much. Kavesh, thank you for your duties, sir. And I think we move on to David Florio for real estate agenda.
Thank you. Real estate has 4 action items for consideration and approval. The first is for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and it is the acquisition of property from Extel Development in support of Phase 2 of 2nd Avenue Subway Project. Bob Paley, Senior Director of Transit-Oriented Development, will now brief the committee on this transaction. Bob.
Great. Thank you, David. So the subject property is one of the key real estate acquisitions needed to support MTA's application for a full funding grant agreement from the Federal Transit Administration to advance the 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 project. MTA has already acquired several critical properties, including at 125th and Lenox and 125th and Park, and these parcels will provide entrances, ancillary buildings, and also our key staging areas for tunneling and tunnel boring machines. And in the May cycle, we're going to be seeking adoption of EDPL determination findings for the final bucket of property interests needed for 2nd Avenue Subway, and those will by and large be smaller properties. As I said, these key sites, including this particular site, are the most expensive, largest sites needed for 2nd Avenue Subway. And with these acquisitions, we remain on budget to acquire the smaller properties that will follow. So specifically for this site, This was the former Pathmark site located on the full block, approximately of 125th, between Lexington and 3rd Avenue. And MTA has no need to acquire that entire parcel. It's under one ownership. So we sought to acquire the block front on Lexington. It's about 40% of the site. So the proposed acquisition in front of you would allow the current owner to develop the remaining portion of the site for commercial purposes, which substantially reduces the cost of the MTA acquisition. So there's several components to the arrangement. One is to acquire Block 1773, Lot 20 from Extel Development for the station entrance, major entrance to the 2nd Avenue subway, which connects to the Lexington line, and an ancillary facility, and it also provides a critical construction staging area. Also, we would be acquiring a subsurface easement volume to construct a ventilation tunnel, which would be built under the commercial building that the developer would build. And the total cost of this acquisition is $82 million. And in order to allow Extel to more quickly construct its adjacent building, Extel's contractors would be enabled to use a small portion of MTA's property after the acquisition at fair market rental, and this license is also included in the agreement. So as I said, this is the highest value property that we're acquiring. It's like the 100% location at Lexington and 125th Street. And so in order to minimize our acquisition costs, as I said, we subdivided the property, and it's subject to a zoning lot development agreement. And what this does is it allows the remaining portion of the site to be developed as of right. We also have allocated additional floor area to that other site, which helps to reduce the acquisition costs. And in addition, the property is subject to a special transit land use district easement, which is provided by Extel to MTA at no cost, which further reduces the acquisition costs. Both MTA Legal and the Federal Transit Administration have concurred with this negotiated purchase price, and MTA Legal has further advised that condemnation is likely to be more expensive than the negotiated purchase price. So accordingly, we seek board authorization to acquire Lot 20, to acquire Lot 27, subterranean easement, and to grant Extel a temporary construction access agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, Kevin's going to just say one thing, and then we'll go to you, Hada.
Yeah, and Jamie, feel free to comment, but, one thing, this is an acquisition that's a prerequisite to getting the full funding grant agreement. But remember, there's other contingencies to getting that full funding grant agreement and being able to move forward with the project, such as getting the FONSI for congestion pricing, so we have the sources to do the full project. And the FTA continues to do their diligence on the project. They have to make a determination that we have the financial stability to over a long period of time. It's one of their requirements to approve the project. So I'm not saying this because I don't support the acquisition. I just want to make sure the committee understands this is one of those
Many steps.
things where we have to keep the project moving forward and expend sources that will, the FTA, we expect them to share and so forth. But this is, this is not the last remaining contingency to move forward on the project. But
Hada, over to you.
Why is Exel leasing part of the property back?
I'm sorry?
Why is Exel leasing part of the property back? Do
Oh,
they need it for their
that's just
development?
It's an accommodation. They need to build a foundation directly on the property line in order to do that more quickly and not get in our way when we're ready to take the site. It allows their contractors several feet or more to actually get in and stage and build quickly.
Okay, so it's just for staging, building foundation. Okay, thank you.
David, over to you.
Yeah, very briefly, I don't want to slow things down. If something falls apart, we're still on the hook for this contract.
Yes.
So that's the risk. Okay, sorry, I'm a little slow.
You got that was Kevin's point.
He was putting it so nicely.
Yes. Yeah.
I would, Chair, if I could just respond, I'll just make sure, I think everyone knows this, but first of all, real estate acquisitions are the often the thorniest things to get into place in order to get these major projects done within the city. And when people talk about why was Second Avenue Subway Phase 1 so expensive, it was because the acquisitions were not done far enough in advance. So, if we want to have a successful project, which this, we all know, Phase 2 is a long-needed amenity for a transit-starved area. We have to get this acquisition done. But the second thing is, Bob described it as a 100% property. I mean, this is a high-value property that's been already rezoned by the city on 125th Street. So, nothing is for certain, but it is a valuable piece of real estate that we're acquiring.
Yeah, and again, I agree with the strategy, but one thing you'll notice in the staff summary, we had an appraiser that came in with a very low appraiser. They had an appraiser that came in with very high, high appraisal, and we're settling in the, in the mid-range, I guess. And the alternative we have is to go through the, taking through eminent domain, and, we're being advised by everybody this is a good settlement deal, but, I want to make sure everybody's clear on that.
And just to make, thanks, just to make sure it's clear, this is where we're going to be building major station entrance. 65% of the users of Second Avenue Subway Phase 2 will pass through the entrance at this location. It is where the key ancillary facilities for this major station will be built, and the only way that we can really do the tunnel boring and the underground work to build that station is from this site. Bob also mentioned that we are retaining 150,000 square feet of potential development rights as well as part of this.
Sharif, please.
Just a question about the payment for this, the $82 million. This is from the first tranche of the federally approved funding. Is that accurate?
I believe this comes from MTA funds, it's my understanding.
Yeah, I believe we have to advance it, and then it's eligible for reimbursement, but I can report back to you on the details on that.
Okay. Andrew, anyone else want to go in on this? Anyone else? No. Okay, Andrew, go ahead, please.
You mean everyone would have gone before me?
No, I wasn't going to put him in front of you. I was just going to make sure we have an order. No, absolutely not.
Thank you.
You're the longest-serving board member. You should go first each time.
Thank you. How far west will the storage area, the layup for the trains, be under 125th Street? And how far west will we have to invoke eminent domain?
Well, we've acquired the property, the ancillary property, I believe at 120th on Lenox, which is, I think, approximately, Jamie, I'm not certain of the actual.
120th on Lenox?
I'm sorry, on 25th and Lenox.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me.
So our facilities will, even though the terminal will basically be between Lexington and Park Avenue under 125th Street, the layup tracks and storage facilities will go as far west as Lenox Avenue?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, we'll confirm Lenox Avenue, but yes.
Yeah, because we obviously have a
tracks.
Lenox Avenue subway we have to deal with as well when we get too close.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, one quick question for you, Jamie. You keep using the term ancillary, so can you what the examples of the ancillary uses are, please?
It's a variety of things related to a station and to powering the subway. So it may be substation space. It's likely signal rooms, other locations for technical components for us to manage the train. There may be, in some cases, some back-of-house space as well. And, obviously, the station areas as well in this location.
Jamie, I'll just also add that probably the biggest volume has to do with ventilation of the subway as a, safety measure, and that's volumetrically. I mean, all those other components are part of it, but volumetrically, it's the sort of the fans and the louvers and that sort of stuff that takes a lot of space.
Thank you, Bob. Paige, quick question for you on Robert's Rules question. I always have this challenge when we do the real estate items. We usually bucket them and take a vote at the end. Is that appropriate, or do we need to take these individually? I feel like I ask this constantly.
You can bucket them and take a vote at the end.
All right,
It's your
David.
preference.
Thank you. Well, that's certainly been the preference the way we've operated, but I just want to be mindful of it. David, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, the second item, Mr. Chairman, is for New York City Transit. It's a license agreement with HS News Corp for 2 retail spaces at the 59th Street Lexington Avenue station. The third item is MTA Long Island Railroad is a grant of an easement to Gershow Recycling Corporation for a freight sidetrack in Medford, New York. And the last item is for MTA Metro North and is the acquisition of a permanent easement and a disposition of an existing one in support of rail operations in Sleepy Hollow. There is additionally one information item. Happy to answer any questions about the foregoing.
Do you want to just tell us the information item? You can't leave it there and then just, it makes no, saying there's one and then not telling us what the information is quite the cliffhanger there.
Yeah, I do it on purpose.
It's
No,
like the final episode of Dallas.
It's
Keep
a
going.
license agreement we did with Austining. It's a license agreement with Austining, a permit for them to use our commuter parking lot during Earth Day this past weekend. Pursuant to board policy.
This past weekend.
That's
Okay. Okay. All right. So give a motion for this tranche. Thank you, David. Second, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstention, real estate items pass. Any new business for the committee? Anyone? Oh. We wait on bated breath for the budget. That's fair. Do you have a say?
Hader requested me to spend some time with her ahead of time on the variable rate portfolio. So if anybody wants to join.
Okay, that's very funny. Lisa, please.
Quick question. I know we're waiting on the lovely budget, but once the budget is approved and hopefully all the numbers go through, what's the timeline on the fare increase as far as what's the process from there, considering we're falling so far behind?
Jay, did you want to talk about the schedule of that? Jay's been managing the complex details of this.
Sure. Depending on what the executive budget includes for the fare and toll increase, we would start the process informing the board of what the fare and toll increases could be up to, and then start the public notice process for public hearings. We would hold them both virtually probably and in person. And then after the comments have been taken, we would take a board vote to implement them. Originally we had a June implementation for board the fare and toll increase. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So it'll be a fluid sort of process. So maybe July, August would be the timeline.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
So we're looking at public hearing of about 30 days?
Yes.
For comment period?
Correct.
And then coming back to the board, committee and then the board?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
It's a great question, Lisa. I will encourage, as a matter of civic participation, the board will be asked probably to join various public hearings for the fare increases. Andrew and I, David, I think, I don't know, other board members have been on. Hayden maybe, when we've had, before you were, but it is quite a special event to sit up there for 3 hours and have members of the public come and speak. And there's no back and forth. We just listen, and I found it actually be a quite rewarding experience to go to, where did we go? Queens College and York College and Brooklyn College and places. We've all been in different places, but it's a pretty fascinating experience and a good one. So I look forward in some ways to being there. Okay, you don't want to come? Okay. All right, well.
Just to follow
David,
up,
please.
I think it's going to be critically important to be in person in this one, because if the public feels shut off and going only virtual, we're going to lose traction in terms of what we have to do.
No, we definitely do have a plan for in-person as well as virtual.
I'm sure each of us will be asked to sign up for a chunk of that to join on the dais. So I may have, hearing no other new business, thank you, Elise, for that question. Motion to adjourn? Motion. Thank you. Second, all in favor? Thank you very much. See you on Wednesday, folks.